The sound of the police car finally pulled into view, and the officers stepped out, their eyes scanning the scene. One of them, a tall man with a serious expression, approached Karen first. "What's going on here, ma'am?" "Officer," Karen said, her voice almost pleading now. "This man is trespassing on private property. He looks suspicious, and I'm just trying to make sure everyone stays safe." Marcus could feel the blood rush to his head. He wasn't just standing there as an innocent bystander anymore. He was now being framed as the problem. His heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment, he thought about walking away. Just leaving. But then he remembered who he was. The park was his, and he wasn't going to let anyone, especially not someone like Karen, take that away from him. The officers turned to him, and for the first time, Marcus spoke up with authority. "I'm not trespassing. I own this park." The officers exchanged a look, then back to Karen, who looked as though she had been slapped. "What do you mean, you own it?" One of the officers asked, clearly unsure of what to believe. Before Marcus could respond, the young man in the hoodie stepped forward, his face suddenly appearing far more familiar than before. It was the same man who had been staring at him earlier, and now he was walking toward the officers with a strange sense of urgency. "Wait," the young man said, his voice low but firm. "I know him." The crowd grew quieter, everyone's eyes shifting between Marcus and the young man in the hoodie. The tension in the air was palpable, like something was about to break wide open. Marcus turned his head toward the stranger, trying to place him. His gut churned, sensing that this wasn't a coincidence. The young man was standing there now, a look of resolve on his face, as if he'd just made a decision. "I know him," the young man repeated, louder this time, stepping toward Marcus. "He's the one who bought the park, remember? We worked together a few weeks ago." Marcus's mind raced. Worked together? He had never seen this guy in his life. But before he could respond, the young man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, unfolding it slowly. It was a lease agreement for the park, an agreement that Marcus had never signed, one that listed someone else's name. Karen's eyes widened as she looked at the paper. "What is that?" she demanded, her voice now laced with suspicion. The young man handed the paper to one of the officers, who quickly scanned it. "This is a lease agreement for the park," the officer said, sounding confused. "But it doesn't have your name on it, sir." Marcus's blood ran cold. The words lease agreement hung in the air like an accusation. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. Someone had gone behind his back. Someone had somehow orchestrated a false document to make it appear as if he didn't own the park. "That's not possible," Marcus said, his voice shaky despite his best efforts to remain calm. I'm the owner. I have all the paperwork. This must be some kind of mistake." But the officer wasn't so sure. "We'll need to verify this, sir. In the meantime, I'm going to have to ask you to stay here until we can figure this out." The young man stepped back, a small, almost smug smile tugging at the corner of his lips. It was a smile that made Marcus's skin crawl. Something didn't add up, and as the seconds ticked by, Marcus realized the truth. This wasn't a random act of prejudice. It was something bigger. Someone was out to take everything from him, and they were willing to go to extreme lengths to make it happen. The crowd was whispering again, their chatter rising as the stakes grew higher. Marcus felt the weight of their gaze. He was no longer just the person accused of being a criminal. He was now the man whose very ownership of the park was being called into question. And the longer this went on, the more he could feel everything slipping through his fingers. But who could he trust? Was the young man in the hoodie part of this plan? Or was he just a pawn in a much larger scheme? And who had forged the lease agreement? The answers felt just out of reach, like pieces of a puzzle that only grew more complicated the harder he tried to put them together. Just as Marcus opened his mouth to demand an explanation, the officer's radio crackled to life, cutting through the tension like a knife. Unit 3, we've got a new lead on the park ownership. You need to get to the city office. Now, the officer paused, his hand still holding the lease agreement. The air between them seemed to freeze in that moment. What was this new lead? Was this the breakthrough Marcus needed, or another twist in the web of lies threatening to unravel everything? The officer's radio crackled again, breaking the tense silence. Unit 3, we need to talk to the city registrar. There's been a mistake with the park's records. It was a sunny afternoon, and Marcus was on his way to check on a park he had recently invested in, one he hoped would bring joy to the community. As he walked toward the gates, his excitement was cut short by a woman standing in his path. Her face was tense, her tone sharp. "You can't be here," she said, eyeing him suspiciously. Marcus was confused but stayed calm. "I have every right to be here," he replied, trying to move past her. But she wasn't having it. She accused him of trespassing, claiming he looked like he was up to no good. What she didn't know was that Marcus wasn't just visiting, he owned the park. And as the confrontation escalated, other people began to notice. Little did she realize, her assumptions were about to lead to an unforgettable twist that would leave her speechless. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to stay composed as more people stopped to watch the scene unfold. The woman, who introduced herself as Karen, was adamant that Marcus had no business being there. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 20 years, she said, crossing her arms. "I've never seen you before, and you definitely don't look like someone who belongs here." Marcus, still calm but now visibly frustrated, tried to reason with her. "I'm here to check on the property," he explained, his voice steady. But Karen wasn't listening. She was already on her phone, threatening to call the authorities. Meanwhile, a few bystanders started whispering among themselves, unsure of what to make of the situation. Marcus noticed some familiar faces in the crowd, people he'd worked with on this very project, but no one stepped forward. He wondered how long this would go on before the truth finally came out. As Karen continued to dial her phone, Marcus felt the eyes of the small crowd on him, their gazes a mix of curiosity and judgment. Some of them exchanged quick glances, as if silently agreeing with her. The air was thick with tension, and Marcus could feel the weight of the situation pushing down on him. He had been through worse before, handling deals, managing projects, and facing bigger challenges. But nothing like this. Nothing quite like being accused of being a criminal in a place that he had poured his time, energy, and resources into. "Why are you making this so difficult?" Karen demanded, looking up from her phone. "This is a public park, and I don't feel safe with you here." Marcus could feel his patience wearing thin, but he didn't want to escalate things. Yet a small voice inside him couldn't ignore the nagging question. Why was she so certain he didn't belong? Then something caught his eye. One of the people in the crowd, a young man wearing a hoodie, was staring at him with an intensity that didn't sit right. Marcus tried to focus on Karen, but the unsettling feeling gnawed at him. Was this just a random confrontation, or was there something more behind it? Karen, still unaware of the fact that Marcus was the owner, kept talking, her voice louder now, as if trying to assert control over the situation. "You don't have any right to be here without proof of your identity. People like you are always causing trouble." Her words echoed, sharp and hurtful. Marcus's heart raced. Was she making this personal? Did she see him as an outsider, simply because of how he looked, or was there more to her suspicion? He glanced back at the young man in the hoodie again. Was he somehow connected to this strange tension, or was it just his mind playing tricks on him? The more Marcus thought about it, the less sense this whole encounter made. Something was off. But just as he was about to speak up again, he heard the unmistakable sound of sirens approaching. The sound of sirens grew louder, echoing through the neighborhood, and Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He glanced toward Karen, who was now standing tall, her finger pointed in his direction, her voice shaking with authority. "Yes, officer, that's him. He's trespassing, and I want him removed from the park immediately. I don't know who he is, but he doesn't belong here." The crowd shifted, some of them starting to murmur, others exchanging looks as if they were waiting for the authorities to take over. Marcus, however, couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was spiraling out of control. The tension in the air was almost suffocating, and as the sirens grew louder, his mind raced. This wasn't just about a misunderstanding anymore. It was about perception, fear, and how easily people could judge based on nothing more than assumptions. He looked at Karen again, her face flushed with confidence, certain she was in the right. But he wasn't going to let her win this time. He had worked too hard to let some random accusation take everything away. And yet, a part of him wondered, what if this wasn't random? What if someone had been feeding her this story, turning her against him from the start?